But all he does is reassure me that it's just the way she is and that he was sure it wasn't her intention to make me feel uncomfortable or disrespected. My boyfriend is a very smooth talker, and I just kept believing him when he would make excuses for her, but I think I was the only one who saw her for what she really was all along. I really wanted to take a trip with my boyfriend to have some time away from his best friend for just the two of us. I didn't tell him this explicitly, but that was my goal with proposing me and him go on a cross-country road trip together. My boyfriend and I have been talking about this trip for a while, and we both love traveling, so I was so excited when he accepted. We had packed the car for the trip the night before, but right before we went to sleep, he dropped the bomb on me that he had invited his best friend to come along with us for the entire trip. I felt so defeated and utterly annoyed in that moment. Yeah, I really didn't want to start a fight with him right before we were going to be crammed in a car for 2 weeks straight, so I decided to just let it slide. I even tried to convince myself that maybe she would have a change of heart during this trip, and we could finally establish some sort of respect between us or maybe even a friendship. I want to burst out laughing when I think about how stupid I was even to agree to go on the trip after my boyfriend told me he invited her. The next 2 weeks turned out to be a bigger dumpster fire than I could have ever pictured. Press share then more for part 2. Part 2. My boyfriend's manipulative best friend weaseled into our romantic getaway and then spent the entire time trying to break us up, so I got the perfect revenge. My boyfriend chose to tell me the night before we left for our trip that he had decided to invite his best friend to come along without even asking me if it was okay first. At that point, I was just so annoyed and tired and I did not have the energy to start a fight about it, so the next morning we picked her up at her house before starting our journey. The moment she got into my car, she had an attitude with me. As usual, she was super touchy-feely with my boyfriend and was barely acknowledging me in the slightest. I started to question why my boyfriend never seemed to register just how disrespectful his best friend behaved towards me, and only a couple hours into the road trip did I regret letting her into the car in the first place. His best friend just kept making excuses to touch him as well as making loads of inside jokes that made absolutely no sense to me but had my boyfriend howling with laughter. I started to feel like a third wheel within my own relationship. My boyfriend seemed to be more happy and entertained with her than he ever was with me. The longer we drove, the more tense I felt and the more I regretted not speaking up about her presence on the trip before we left. I felt my blood pressure rise with every state that we drove through. It just felt like his best friend was doing everything she could to press my buttons. When we stopped to use the bathroom at a gas station in the evening, I saw her holding his hand in the convenience store, and I remember thinking that it was so inappropriate and weird, but my boyfriend didn't seem to mind, so I continued to stay quiet. I had finally reached my limit when it had been my turn to drive, and after I had been driving for 4 hours straight, I turned around to look into the backseat only to find them spooning each other while they slept. I felt a huge wave of rage and nausea come on as I saw my boyfriend holding her in front of him like he usually does to me. I yelled at them to wake them up and asked them what the heck was going on, but all they said was that they had just fallen asleep and the cuddling was a complete accident since there wasn't much room in the car with all our bags. His best friend did not sound apologetic at all and even had the nerve to let out a little giggle during this confrontation. At that instant, I knew I had made a huge mistake coming out here with them, but there was no way I was going to let his best friend steal my boyfriend from right under my nose. So I decided to drink a bunch of energy drinks so I could stay up and keep an eye on them. I really pushed my body to the limit, and when I crashed hard. I fell asleep in the backseat and slept for almost 6 hours straight. I was sleeping really deeply and I remember having anxiety as I felt myself falling asleep since I was sure they might be messing around with each other while I slept. I already felt like I was living a waking nightmare at this point in the trip, but I had no idea just how much worse things would get after I woke up. Press share then more for part 3.